What's going on, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Today, we chat with former soccer player Angelica Galluzzo as she gives us insight into how she dealt with 5 knee surgeries in 5 years, as well as navigating the Division I recruiting process from Canada despite those injuries, and how she created her podcast all around mental health. So again, welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We are back with another episode here of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. And today, Angelica is joining us from her podcast studio. So thank you for taking some time out. And as we always do, Angelica, we love starting out with just allowing our subject to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about them, where they're from, where they grew up. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of give an intro of who Angelica is.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Angelica Galluzzo, and I grew up in the Greater Toronto area in Canada. So I think most of your guests have been American, so it might be a bit of a different story coming from a Canadian. But I played soccer my whole life growing up, and we'll get into more of my story and what that recruiting process looked like. But other than that, I have my own podcast. Like you said, I'm a huge mental health advocate, and my podcast is all centered around personal stories, whether that's mental health related, societal issues, cultural issues. I really try to cover a range of topics, and just general mental health education as well is something that I want to put out there. So happy to be sharing my experiences with athletics and how it kind of connects to that mental health experience.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your podcast. And, I love how, these days mental health isn't such a word that's, it's not a phrase that's really whispered anymore. It's out front. Everyone talks about it all the time. But before we even get to your podcast, I want to learn a little bit more about you as an athlete. You said you grew up playing soccer. What age did you first throw on the shin guards and the cleats and get out there?
I actually first started playing when I was 3 because I'm a November baby. So it was that summer that I could play. And my sister's 1 year older than me, so I always played a year up. That way my parents could take us both to the same games and stuff. But then as we got older, we kind of shifted into our own programs and teams. But yeah, since I was 3 until I guess 21 was my prime varsity years. Yeah.
Did you play any other sports growing up, or was soccer your number one love as a 3-year-old?
Soccer was my number one love. I also did figure skating for some time, but quickly learned that I preferred being on the field. And then throughout high school, I was also a big runner. So I did track and I did cross country as well.
Yeah. So as a multi-sport athlete in high school, that balance of playing multiple sports, it's kind of tough for some athletes. And obviously you have the academic part of it. What was it like for you? And like you said, you're the first person that I've interviewed that is from Canada. Everybody else has been from here in the States. What's it like growing up being a multi-sport athlete in Canada and kind of juggling that as a teenager along with, all the other pressures and things of the world?
Yeah. So the first distinction I always tell Americans, because they find this crazy, is that your high school sports are like your be all end all. Like if you play a high school sport, that's it. But for us, it's our club. So it's what we do outside of high school that is the most important. And then high school, it is serious, but it's definitely not as extreme. So my, I guess, priority was my club sport. And then I just did the track and cross for fun at school. And I think the time management piece was something that kind of always came naturally to me just because I'm such a busy person and I need things on the go, or else I think experience some of those like mental detriments of being in my own head and things like that. So always having a lot of commitments was something that definitely was a good thing for me. And big fan of to-do lists, just always making sure you're staying on top of your academic, your athletic, and your social commitments as well. Like you are a human first and foremost. So I think it did take me some time to learn that aspect, like learning to prioritize myself and my own well-being. But it's a process, and I think you grow with it as you go through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's completely true. As a high school athlete, you kind of identify as just an athlete. Especially here in the States. You've got your school colors on wherever you go, and you grow up in a town where there's multiple schools, and athletes from other schools. So that's kind of your identifying factor. At what age would you say you kind of identified that I'm not just an athlete, right? I am more than a cross country runner. I'm more than a soccer player. Was that something? Excuse me. Was that something you thought of while you were in high school, kind of balance things, or did that come much later on?
Definitely much later. Throughout my high school years, my athletic identity was my whole identity. Like I was a soccer player, that was it. I was only focused on my goals and what I was achieving on the field. And everything I did, I kind of related back to soccer, like how my grades were was going to influence the scholarship I would get, like what volunteering I was doing was going to help my applications and coaches. And I was always thinking about that. I would say that kind of shifted for me when I transferred back home, which I'll give more context to shortly, I'm sure, because that's just kind of when some things came into perspective for me and I started doing things other than just soccer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, let's kind of fast forward a little bit to, your later years of a high school athlete when, and I read your letter that you did for us, and everyone should definitely go check that out. Anybody that's listening to this right now or watching this should definitely go check out that letter. It's incredibly insightful. And we'll get more into that here in a second, but I said, I read your letter and there's a lot of insight for you in there, but like, what was it like? And I know you say you wanted to always play Division I soccer. What was it like as you're growing and those Division I schools start to come knocking? And obviously it's a little bit different, right? Because you are in, you're in Canada, you're not here in the States. So when you have your eye on these schools, what's that recruiting process like? And, how did you balance it with everything else going on as a teenage athlete?
Yeah, I was lucky to get a lot of support from teams, coaches, players, because a lot of us were in similar boats. That was kind of something that was ingrained in us as children, being elite athletes, saying like, the goal for us was mainly Division I. It was getting a scholarship to the States. And that was something that coaches drilled into us. And we would always go to showcase tournaments. And that was kind of the biggest time for us to really play in front of American schools. So going into that, we would have to check out, I remember all the coaches' lists of who would be at that showcase tournament, send out your mass email, send highlight clips, but also try to make it personal enough that it's not just so generic. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of that like behind the scenes work, trying to get yourself out there as a Canadian because you're not on the similar eye that your American athletes are. So a lot of that stuff, and just like, I guess, visiting schools while we're on showcase tournaments. We got to see a few really cool places. And then as well, once you're playing at the higher level so I'm from Ontario, and we would play in, it's called the Ontario Youth Soccer League, which is the highest level that you can play in here. So once you're at that stage, I think you're already kind of up on the pedestal when it comes to coaches being aware of the teams that you play for if they are doing Canadian scouting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a lot of hard work and just not knowing what was the best option for me, because there's so many different options, obviously, as you know, as anybody knows who's going through the process. So I think just the biggest, I guess, shock and cultural change was the idea of moving countries, moving far away from your family and starting your collegiate experience.
Yeah. So what age would you say the letters started coming, or you started getting phone calls for some of these schools, or was it really hard for you to kind of get in contact with some of these coaches?
I would say we started sending letters and things around like 13, 14. So going from that grade 8 to grade 9 transition. And then there's also NCAA rules where they can't talk to you before a certain age. You have to go through kind of some back end scouting connections. And then throughout my high school years, there was some, I guess, mutual connections, interests. Some fell off, some went forward, and we would just kind of keep those lines open. But then as I went through my injuries as well, that also shifted things for me, as some scouts were not interested in somebody who was injured. So that was a lot to acknowledge myself. And then kind of just work my way along that path as I went through my own recovery and continuing to look into the future.
Yeah. So what schools were on your top 5, I guess, when you were, looking at leaving high school and going to the next level?
So personally, I didn't really have like any in mind. I did visit a few. Cincinnati, which is the one that I went to, was always one of my top ones because it was the first like showcase tournament we went to was in Ohio when we actually got to visit campus. So I think that just stuck with me always as being like the first NCAA school I saw, and I saw all the athletic buildings and how much they prioritized their sports. So I was always just really drawn to that program, which is obviously why I ended up going there. But I was speaking to a few other schools, went to a couple other visits, and when I got to the end of it, I guess NC just like felt like the best decision for me.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. And you mentioned the injuries. How young were you when that first injury happened, and how did you handle it?
My first one was 14, and I was actually playing in a high school soccer game that I wasn't supposed to be playing in because, as I said, our priority is club, and we were advised not to play high school soccer because we had our other commitments outside of that. And I kind of did go behind my team's back to play because I wanted to play, and I got hurt in the first game of that season. And I will never forget it. My dad was at that game, and he just looked at me, and obviously I was in so much pain. So that was the first pressing issue, but just so much regret as well in that moment, saying like, why did I do this? It wasn't worth it. It was just for fun. And it's hard to live with regrets as well, because obviously I'm in the position that I'm in today and I had to go through everything that I went through. But it was tough. And I think the first one was definitely the strongest I was through all of them because it was fresh. I was still very, very eager to get back. I was motivated. It sucked hearing that, you tore your ACL, you'll be out for 6 months to a year, however long it was. But I think my mentality through the first one is really something that kept me going because I was still so stuck on the next thing, which was getting that scholarship opportunity.
Yeah. So how did you bounce back from that, mentally, physically, you can will your body to do basically anything. Surgeries help, your body's going to heal. But the hardest one is that mental aspect of it. And now with you being a mental health advocate, and looking back on that, how would you say you handled that first injury before, the next 4 surgeries came about?
Yeah, the first one was definitely, I wouldn't call it easy, but the easiest of the 5 because I was so, I guess, determined is the best word to use. And every day I would wake up and I was so focused on my recovery. I knew what had to get done that day, whether it was just lifting my leg off a chair because you can't do that after surgery. And little things like I had my calendar of what a typical recovery timeline looked like. And I was so on the dot with everything. I was like, 3 months today, I can run in a straight line. 5 months, I can start pivoting. Like I was so aware of what that timeline looked like and what I had to meet. So I don't think I ever took a second to really acknowledge the fact that this is what's happening to me. I didn't really allow myself to feel any feelings. I was just like, okay, this happened. What's next? Like, how can I get back? How can I get better? And I think ultimately it was a good thing that I was that strong because I think I did come back as a better player because of how much, I guess, focus I put into off the field strength and things like that. I just came back a much more confident player and person. Honestly, it did extend to off the field.
Yeah. So how, and you did mention, when you get injured, those offers and that attention, it does fall off. How did you handle that? And, what did you do to kind of remedy the coaches who no longer were interested in an injured player?
Yeah, it was a bit of balancing both my own emotions and trying to understand it from their perspective because a lot of the recruiting does happen in those first couple of years of high school. People are verbally committed until they sign in their senior year. So I did understand where they were coming from. You know, I had to call them and say, I'll be out for 6 months. Will you be willing to see me play then? And they would respond by saying, no, I'm sorry. We want to have our recruiting class done by this month or something like that. So that was tough because I think I had a few in a row say similar things to me, and I was defeated. I was absolutely crushed. I thought that, you know, I had lost every single opportunity that I've worked so hard for, and they weren't even going to give me a chance to show them that I could recover, that I could get back. So that was tough mentally, and definitely that did take a hit to my recovery. On those days, I did not feel like doing anything because I started asking myself, like, what's the point? Is it worth it? Am I even going to get to reach that goal? But I absolutely have to give Cincinnati all the credit in the world. Those coaches treated me so well just for the fact that everything I went through, they stuck by my side. They still kept their promises to me. So they weren't the only school that did, I guess, allow me to continue my recovery. The first time I called them, they said, you know what, that's fine. That sucks. I'm sorry to hear that, but call us when you're at your next showcase, when you're recovered, keep us updated, and we'll come back and watch you play. So along with a few other schools that did that, I was really grateful to get that positive news because that's ultimately what kept me going.
Mm-hmm. So now as you're going throughout your career and, you know, as athletes, you know, you kind of get on a streak of, you know, I'm playing really well. Everything is going so great. I have colleges that are interested and, you know, I'm doing all the right things. And then you tweak an ankle, you get another injury. That's basically what happened with you, right? You're smooth sailing after you get out of, you know, one injury, and then another one happens, and then another one happens. You know, we already said you had 5 knee surgeries in 5 years, which you mentioned in your letter. How much of a toll did that take on you? And how hard was it to bounce back after each one of those things?
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours, but I'll try to summarize, I guess, each one to keep it short. But so after the first one, I had recovered, got back to playing that season, had an incredible club season. We won provincials and nationals that year, which was just so surreal. It was amazing to achieve from a small town. And then that fall as well, right after we won nationals, I had told all the coaches of the success I had seen, sent them some clips, and I was given an offer from Cincy, which I had verbally accepted at that point. So I was on a high. I got my scholarship offer. We just won nationals. It was also incredible. And then in July of the following year, so you would have reported in August for preseason, we were playing in just our last showcase tournament as a club team. Again, at that point, I didn't need to be showcased per se, for lack of a better word, because I already had my plan. So a lot of regret there, again, just saying, like, did I even need to be playing in that? But regardless, got hurt again, tore my other ACL 1 month before I was supposed to move to Cincy. And that one was definitely much more emotional than the first one because I had thought, I'm going to call Cincy. They're going to revoke my offer. They're not going to allow me to come in as an injured player. Like, why would they want to pay for somebody who's just going to sit on the bench? So I remember like shaking, having to call them and tell them what had happened. And again, they were so great. They had assured me, like, you know what, this sucks again. I'm so sorry this is happening, but we've seen you as a player. We've seen you as a person, and you're somebody that we want to have in our program. So they said, do your surgery, come here, we'll do all your rehab and hopefully get you ready for next season. But they said, we had verbally given you this offer, so we're going to stand by it whether you're playing or not, which was super helpful and promising to hear because, again, thought my whole world was shattered.
That's really rare too.
So,
you know, that's extremely.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Especially that close together. So yeah, I had my surgery at home, moved to Cincinnati about halfway through preseason, which that in itself was just a whole mental health struggle, which that's another story. But rehabbed all year, sat out my freshman year as a redshirt freshman, and then in the training room all day, every day. And got cleared in February to start spring training, which was such an amazing feeling, finally being able to play, put my cleats on, like actually feel like I was part of the team on the field doing drills. And as I said in the letter, I had 6 days of full training. And then one day I was just sitting at my desk doing homework, and I stood up and I like absolutely shredded my meniscus. And that like was the worst pain injury and the worst injury itself, which is crazy to believe because I was standing up from a chair.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that recovery itself was much harder because of the physical aspect. It was a bucket handle tear, so there's just some different, I guess, rehab processes you need to take in that sense. But emotionally, that one was definitely the hardest, just because, again, I wasn't on a high. I just felt finally like I had a place there. I was finally playing again. I went through so much the last 2 years, and then this happens. And it happened standing up at a chair. Like that was just another thing that kept sticking in my head. Like, why did this happen? So that was tough. And I remember I had to call them again, go through all that similar, I guess, mental situation. And the recovery through that one was just a lot harder to get up out of bed every day and show up to the training room. I was just so fed up at that point. I hated having to sit out, not go to practice, because when they were practicing, I was in the training room doing my exercises, and that just took a lot out of me, mentally, physically, emotionally. I was absolutely drained. I was so tired of being the injured kid. And I didn't feel like I really, I guess, had a place on the team. And I was trying so hard to, like, you know, if you can't play, you're trying to be a leader in other ways. You're still trying to be a part in some way, but it was just so hard to do that. So fast forward, recovered. I sat out another season as a red shirt, the medical red shirt. Sorry, that was the term for it. And then I got cleared to play in 2 spring games the following year, it was a really amazing experience. At that point, I think I was just mentally done with everything, but I'm still really happy I got a chance to get on the field, at least after 3 surgeries in those first 3 years. So did that, and then some personal things happened, and I just decided I wanted to transfer a little bit closer to home. And that was, like, I think the toughest decision I've ever had to make, but it also felt really easy because I knew it was what I needed. It was what was going to be best for me. But that decision was so much more than just coming home. It was giving up my whole childhood dream. It was giving up, like I said, my athletic identity was my whole life. So for everything, the last 16 years of me saying, like, I'm going to go D1, I'm going to play, I'm going to do all this stuff, and then having to come back home was like such a hard thing for me to grasp. But at that point, it felt like this is what you need to do for your own well-being, like not just as a soccer player, like for you as a person, you need to just move a little closer to home.
Yeah.
So I did. And yeah, moved home. I can keep going. But anyway, I played for 2 seasons here at home, got hurt in both ones. The first one, I really only played half a season because I was playing every other game, because I was playing with a torn meniscus all season until it finally went. And then same thing happened. So those at that point, I was kind of just like, whatever, it happened. I'll get better and play again. And at this point, I'm just grateful to be walking. I still do play summer soccer, which I'm really, really happy about, that I am still able to play and have fun and enjoy it. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster, to say the least.
Yeah. And, handling all of those things, and, we mentioned it, not just physically, but mentally, is so hard. Going through so many things. I mean, when you get to the 3rd surgery, I'm sure you're just like, look at everything in my knees, make sure that it's going to hold up, because I don't want to be back here. Right. And it's so hard to do. But now, you mentioned transferring, and transferring was, not just going home, being closer to family, it was giving up on a dream. What type of internal conversation did you have? And then conversations with coaches and parents and friends about, okay, this is the decision that I need to make. And, You said it was really, really hard, but what were those conversations like, and what type of support did you get for making the decision that you were going to leave Cincinnati?
Yeah, I remember my dad being the first one to call me because I had expressed like I was just done. I wanted to come home. I didn't want to do this anymore. And he called me right away. And I think my dad growing up, he was a soccer player as well. So he was always the one pushing me. He knew I had it in me to go to the next level. So he called me and he's like, "Are you sure? Like, is this really what you want to do? Like, we can support you through this next recovery. We'll get you back on the field. Is this like, have you thought about this?" And I remember just bawling. And my dad's not a very sentimental person. So that was like the deepest conversation we've ever had. But I remember just telling him, like, yes, I know how hard this is, like, not just for me, for him too, because it was his dream for me.
Mhm.
Um, so it was a lot, I think, for everybody to accept as a family, my friends back home. Um, but I had just said, like, I do feel confident in this decision. This is what I need to do. And I went into my coach's office the next day and I was just bawling, having to tell them. And they were very, very sweet. They had asked me as well, like, "Are you sure this is what you want to do? We had promised you your 4 years, even if you don't recover from this final injury, like, we'll still keep you on as something related to the program, whether that was a coach, some sort of research assistant, like whatever it was, I would still be involved in the team." Um, and that, I think, the support I just got from the coaches was absolutely incredible through everything. And again, I owe them so much that they still gave me that chance when a lot of people wouldn't. And I still got the opportunity to go be a D1 athlete, live the college lifestyle, even if I wasn't necessarily playing. But yeah, there wasn't too many external conversations because I think I was very bold in what I had wanted. And I had said, like, this is not easy. I'm not saying I'm confident. This is awesome. Like I said, it is what I need to do. It's breaking my heart that I have to do this. But I just think it's what everybody needs at this point because it was putting everybody through a lot. You kind of rely on your support system through something like that, obviously. So constantly going through thing after thing, it was just enough is enough kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So, how was it moving back home then? I mean, I know, I've talked to some athletes that, they go to schools that are close to home, and it's tough to manage because you're trying to start your new life as a college student, but then your old life is still there with your friends and your family. How hard is that balance for you?
It was tough, mainly the acceptance of going, I think, from like an NCAA program to it's called an OUA, Ontario University Athletics here. The culture is just very different around sports. I'll say that that was the biggest adjustment I had. And academics are a much bigger focus here than I think because sports are more of a priority there. So it was just a big culture shock for me, is how I would describe it. There was a lot of adjustment, a lot of changes to be made to my own, like how I approached every day. Like I spent way more time in the library after I transferred than I ever did at UC. So I was lucky. I actually had a couple of friends at the school I transferred to that I played club with. So that transfer process was actually very smooth for
Mhm.
me. I had called the coach. He was interested because we had played in front of him and he helped me through because I had decided I wanted to transfer in April. So very last minute. And then I was going to start in September. So I was stressed about that, but it did all work out the best way it could have. I mean, the house I was moving into got flooded. So I was living on someone's couch for a few months. So like everything did kind of go wrong, but at the end of the day, we made it. Um, but yeah, I think just a lot of changes to how I approached and I guess prioritized my sport was where a lot of things changed because I started getting involved in like student athlete committee and going to all these things that I didn't really have time for before. I got involved in, it's called the Student Athlete Mental Health Initiative. I was the co-lead of that for my 3 years that I was at this school. So I really started, I guess, finding my place outside of just soccer and there was still like a larger athlete community. So, I was making friends with people on other teams. I was going out into the actual community outside of athletics, which I never really had experience with before. So I think that transfer was such a big shift for like just my own personal growth, because that was when, like I said, my athletic identity started shifting away to more than just a soccer player. Like, I am a person. I have all these really great experiences I can talk about and hopefully give a voice to other people who are going through similar things. And yeah, that's really like, I guess the biggest thing that I got out of that transfer was just how I started viewing myself and some of those experiences as well.
So now let's fast forward to, after college. College is kind of coming to a close for you. And you're looking at what you're going to do when you're no longer a student. What avenues are you looking at? And, we've established that you have your own podcast and everything else, but like, what are you looking at that you want to do when you're no longer a student, no longer an athlete?
Yeah, so I was a COVID graduate, class of 2020, 21 actually, because it was that following year. So we were still in lockdown. So I think perceptions were a little bit skewed than maybe most people. I think all of whoever graduated in that time, nobody knew what was going on. So I was kind of just up in the air waiting to graduate. I had my summer job I was going to. I wasn't really too pressed for like the next thing. And I think that was the first time in my life I wasn't pressed for the next thing. It was actually a time for me to slow down. Everything was closed. We couldn't really go anywhere or do anything. So it gave me a lot of time to self-reflect. And I called the podcast like my COVID passion project, because I had so much extra time on my hands, and it was so spontaneous. I just one day went on Amazon, ordered a mic, and I'm like, I'm doing this. I'm going to go fully into this and do it. And I think it was kind of an extension of things that I started finding myself doing before, which was things like the Student Athlete Mental Health Initiative, which was sharing a lot of my story on social media. I did a lot of it on my personal platforms, just being, I guess, like an identifiable ally for anybody going through a mental health struggle. I would share that I've been through similar things. And being a part of that SAMI group really allowed me to stand up in front of a group and share, these are some things that have happened to me. It's okay to talk about it. We're all going through different but similar battles, and it's okay to kind of talk about those vulnerable parts of our lives. So doing that really gave me comfortability with being vulnerable. And that's when I decided, I do have a voice. I can use it. If I'm comfortable sharing these not so great stories and kind of more difficult times in my life, then I can kind of inspire others to do the same, or just give them a platform to come on and share. And I think that was great about the first part of my podcast, because I had a lot of personal friends from high school come on and share their stories that I had no idea happened to them. So yeah, it's just really been a great journey and a huge learning curve for sure.
So as you're, from your first podcast episode to, where you're at now, how much would you say you've learned, and how much would you say your podcast has changed and shaped and molded into what it is?
That's funny that you asked that, because I just wrote down yesterday actually a list of accomplishments. I was doing some journaling, and it has grown so much, and I am so proud of everything that I've been able to do, but also just the people I've gotten to connect with. Even you, I would never have met you or talked to you if I didn't have this platform. So I've had people from all over the world. I've had guests from Australia, from Sweden, from UK, from the States, from Canada. And I've just gotten to hear so many different life experiences, which I think we learn so much from. It's not always about these big mental health struggles. It's just you grew up in a different walk of life with different maybe cultural, social expectations that you had. Tell me about it. I want to know what life was like for you and how different it was for me. So I think really just having conversations with people has been such a big learning experience, but also just perspective wise, opening up my mind to different things that I never really thought about before. And then just my own, I guess, internal improvements of how I do my podcast, the processes. I've updated things that I've used behind the scenes, editing software and things like that, and just change the way I get my guests. I really take time to make sure that these are people I want on my platform that have similar values and missions as me. So there's definitely been a lot of growth on my end. And then also just like social media stuff is always fun to gain new followers and see your community build and grow. And I've made so many friends on Instagram that I've never met in person, but that are so supportive, like in this big mental health community that exists online. It's actually wild.
So as you have your own mental health platform now, and one of the things that I mentioned when we first started our conversation is mental health is no longer a phrase that is just whispered. What's it mean to you to be a part of something that is so huge and has grown to be something that is on the forefront for athletes all over the world?
Yeah, it's a very complex topic. And like you said, mental health is no longer whispered, but like mental illness is, therapy is, medication is. There are still several aspects within the conversation that still have such a long way to go. And I think this conversation is slowly shifting away from, I think everybody's kind of aware mental health is health. It's important. Everybody needs to take care of themselves, but kind of taking it a step further and getting into systemic talks like, why is therapy not accessible? Why is it not affordable? Why are so many people even struggling with their mental health? Why is social media such a bad influence? Like there are so many questions that we can dive deeper into. And that's hopefully like where I come in, where I'm most passionate about is the idea of like revolutionizing the way that we see and talk about these things and taking it that step further, because we've come so far, but there's still such a long way to go. And especially in the athlete space, because it's been such a big part of my life, I didn't want the platform to just be focused on athletes because I wanted it to reach a wider audience. But regardless, I'm always very transparent of how much sports have impacted me and how it's made me into the person that I am today. Like I wouldn't have any of the qualities that I have, and you can go like time management, leadership, all these things that I learned from being a busy student athlete that many of us have, thank you to our sports, if I didn't go through all of that. So I think just extending that conversation, it's a totally different conversation when you talk about mental health in sports, because there's so many other aspects like performance, building bonds within teams, and there are different avenues you can take that conversation. But regardless, I think it is a really powerful position to be in, and it's something that I'm very grateful that I get the chance to do, to try to improve everything about mental health, the whole conversation. But yeah, hopefully this is just another platform on the way to something bigger.
So we're to the part now where we've got 5 rapid fire questions that we want to get your take on. And the first one is, who is somebody that you looked up to as a student athlete?
Okay, this is my answer now. I don't know if this would have been my answer a few years ago, actually, but Abby Wambach is the world's greatest soccer player, American, not just because of her athletic ability, but just who she is as a person and everything she fights for in social justice, activism. Everything she stands for is just something I aspire to be one day.
Who is somebody that you would love to have on your podcast?
Glennon Doyle, which is Abby Wambach's wife. Glennon Doyle is an author, and she wrote one of my favorite books, Untamed, and both of the work they do together is absolutely incredible. So honestly, I'd have both of them. That's my answer.
What made you fall in love with soccer?
Oh, man. I think soccer was always where I found my place in life and my passion. Like I always just felt like myself on the field. It was something that I did have like athletic ability and talent for, but also just who it made me into, what it made me feel on the field. It was just always, as cheesy as it is, like a place that felt like home.
You've interviewed a good amount of people at this point. What's a piece of knowledge that you've gotten from either collectively from the people you've interviewed or for one specific person that you've interviewed?
I had one of my earlier guests say kind of that like her mental illness was her superpower. And that's something that stuck with me because that's something I also have always said, but not using the word superpower. And I think that just gave it like that extra emphasis because it's not always a horrible thing. And some of us, I know we didn't really get into my experiences with depression in this episode, but a lot of what I say I've gone through that journey is something that has also built me into the person that I am today. And you can use it for good if you're doing it correctly.
Mm-hmm. And the last question, and this is something we ask everyone, is what's a piece of advice that you think the next generation of athletes needs to know?
I would say to slow down and embrace the process, because one day you'll look back and whether you're graduated, whether you're nearing your end of your collegiate career, you're going to miss those early days and, you know, how stressful it was to go look up all the scouts that were going to be at this tournament. But just enjoy the process and know that you're doing this to better yourself as a person and not just as an athlete, because whatever decision you make, whether that's college, professional, wherever you're at in your journey, you yourself as a person, not an athlete, have to live in that environment, have to go through this whole experience. So make sure it's one that you're confident in and you know is going to make you excel as a human.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. Before I let you go, I want you to plug your podcast. Tell us what the name of it is, where we can find it, and you know what the scheduling is of your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is called The Revolutionized Mind, and it's available everywhere: Apple, Spotify, Google. There's a million. And all my social media is at The Revolutionized Mind. I'm quite active on Instagram and TikTok. I try to be. And yeah, episodes come out every Friday, so be sure to tune in.
That's awesome. We will definitely be sure to tune in. Angelica, this was awesome. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out. I think we can probably have 3 or 4 more episodes of your story, and who knows, at some point maybe we will. But I really appreciate it. I'm going to let you go enjoy the rest of your day. I know you said you want to get outside today. You've been doing work all day. So I'm going to let you do that, but I really appreciate it. Do you have anything else that you would like to leave us with before we end today?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I hope I wasn't rambling too much. On my story, there's so many different avenues I can take, and I was trying to keep it concise, but I just hope there's at least one message, one thing that somebody can take away from this conversation. And the one message I always like to leave people with is just that, you know, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you can't see it right now, it's there, it's distant. Even if you just see that slight shimmer, like every decision you make can bring you closer to that light, even on your darkest days. So try to find that light and do what you can to get closer to it, even if that's just laying in bed some days.
Thank you very much, Angelica, and we hope to catch up with you again soon. Thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. To make sure you don't miss when a new episode comes your way, head to the Athletes to Athletes YouTube page to like and subscribe, or to Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcast. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.